It didn't start with fire. It started with silence. The kind that comes before something terrible. Across the skies, the stars dimmed. Not all at once, but enough to make people look up. Enough to make scientists lose sleep. Enough to make governments go quiet behind closed doors. Then came the noise. Not in the form of sound, but in the form of fear. In less than a day, satellites began to vanish. Entire constellations of them, gone like they'd never been launched. No debris. No signals. No answers. Just blank patches in the sky. The internet buzzed with theories. Some thought it was solar activity. Others said sabotage. But a few, those with military clearance and a seat at the table, knew the truth before the world did. We weren't alone. And whoever they weren't coming in peace. It started with a shadow. Not over cities but over oceans. Over the deserts. Over the deep forests no one watched. Ships the size of mountains drifted silently into Earth's orbit, dark as obsidian, invisible to radar, but heavy enough to pull the tide off its rhythm. By the time the world caught on, it was already too late. They didn't announce themselves with words. No demands. No translations. Just a single broadcast sent to every screen on Earth. A brief, pulsing image. A circle. A slash through it. And then a countdown. 1 week. People thought it was a joke. Until the cities started disappearing. Not bombed. Not destroyed. Just lifted. Uprooted. Gone. Glass and steel and human life, erased like sand in the wind. Panic followed. Governments collapsed into themselves, hiding what they knew. Military jets scrambled into the skies like hornets, firing at clouds, desperate to find something to fight. But the enemy wasn't in the clouds. It was above them. Watching. Waiting. Measuring. And then, finally they came. Not through the skies but through the cracks. A mining outpost in Siberia was the first to report it. Tunnels opening where no tunnels had been. Structures buried deep under rock that hadn't seen light in millions of years. Creatures built like weapons crawling out of them. Not metal. Not flesh. Something in between. Some ran. Most didn't make it far. The few who did had the same thing to say. It wasn't just an invasion. It was a purge. The visitors didn't want peace or land or resources. They wanted silence. Earth without voices. Earth without us. But Earth had other plans. In a world already fractured by borders and power, the silence forced something unexpected. Unity. Not between countries. Between people. The kind of people who'd lost everything and still had something left to fight for. Like the woman in the Arizona desert who watched her home burn, but refused to run. She welded scrap into weapons and led 20 strangers into a fight no one believed they could win. Or the old man in the ruins of Osaka, who taught orphans how to move like smoke and stab like fire. Or the kid in Lagos who rigged a school computer into a radar that spotted the enemy 2 days before the military ever could. These weren't soldiers. They weren't leaders. They weren't chosen. They were what Earth had left. And that was enough. The thing the aliens didn't understand was simple. Earth had been at war long before they arrived. Not always for the right reasons. Not always against the right enemies. But humans? Humans knew how to lose and keep fighting. They knew pain. They knew hunger. They knew rage. But most of all, they knew each other. And that made them dangerous. The invaders were fast. Precise. Perfect. But humans were messy. Unpredictable. Capable of things that logic didn't account for. In the second month of the invasion, a single farmer from a village no one could pronounce took down an enemy war walker with a harpoon made from a broken lamppost. 3 days later, a hacker in Finland sent a virus into the alien comms by bouncing a signal off the moon. It shut down 3 ships. People didn't need orders. They needed time. But time was something they didn't have. Because deep underground, beneath what was left of Colorado, a council of survivors had gathered. Not presidents, not generals, but people who had lost too much to sit still. They spoke in whispers, made plans in the dark. They didn't know how to stop the enemy. But they knew what not to do. Don't beg. Don't hide. Don't wait. Strike first. Strike hard. Make them bleed if they could bleed. And if they couldn't, break something they cared about. Humanity didn't have the numbers. But they had will. And sometimes that's enough. The aliens underestimated what it meant to attack a planet that refused to lie down. They underestimated the way humans could turn grief into grit. They underestimated Earth. And Earth was done being underestimated. In the third wave they deployed machines that drained entire lakes in minutes. That stripped forests of life with one breath. That tore through steel like paper. But they made a mistake. They took a small town in the mountains thinking no one would fight back. thinking it would be another clean sweep. They were wrong. That town wasn't full of soldiers. It was full of engineers, retired pilots, hunters, old mechanics who remembered how to build things with their hands, kids who grew up with nothing but learned how to survive because of it. And when the invaders came, they didn't find victims. They found traps, booby-trapped bridges, explosive drones, railguns made from mining tools. They found resistance. For the first time, one of their command ships crashed. The sky burned with it, and the world saw. Hope returned, not as a speech but as a scream of defiance. And then, one by one, others began to rise. Cities buried in ash lit up again. Factions that hated each other now fought side by side. Soldiers who once guarded borders now guarded civilians. Because suddenly the enemy wasn't just an invader. The enemy had become a mirror. They reminded humanity of everything it never wanted to be: cold, calculating, merciless. And in that reflection, people found something they thought they'd lost: purpose. The war wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. But Earth was no longer backing down. And somewhere in the orbit above, watching the tide shift, the alien high command made a calculation. They had misjudged the species. They had assumed weakness in emotion. But emotion was the very thing that made humans dangerous. Because what logic couldn't understand, rage could ignite. What planning couldn't fix, sacrifice could overcome. And in the smoldering ruins of a world that refused to die, a new kind of war was about to begin. Not a war for power. Not a war for land. A war for the right to exist. A war to make sure the universe never made the same mistake again. They came here thinking it would be easy. They thought Earth was soft. That humanity had no teeth left. But they hadn't seen the look in a mother's eyes when she defends her children. They hadn't heard the silence of a man burying his last friend. They hadn't felt the weight of 10 billion hearts beating for one thing: vengeance. And in that heartbeat was the sound of something ancient. Older than their ships. Older than their weapons. The sound of a species that had crawled through ice ages, clawed through fire, dragged itself up from dust, and refused to die. They didn't come here to negotiate. And we didn't come here to lose. So when they send their final wave, when they drop their largest machines and blacken the skies, when they unleash whatever horror they've kept hidden for the endgame, they'll find us waiting. With steel. With blood. With fury. Because this planet isn't just rock and water. It's home. And Earth has one last message for them. You chose the wrong planet. The silence before the storm is gone now. The air hums with the sound of machines turning on. Cities are building again, not for comfort but for war. Old scars have opened. But they've also connected us. And in the shattered night, under a sky that remembers everything, the first wave of the real resistance begins to rise. They are not heroes. They are not perfect. But they are human. And that will be enough. Because the final war for Earth has begun. And this time we fight not to survive, but to win. It started in the shadows long before the first ship ever touched the sky. Long before cities were turned to ash and the oceans began to shift. Long before humanity looked up in fear, there were whispers. Not from the stars, but from Earth itself. The kind of signs people only noticed in hindsight. Animals migrating out of season. Fault lines rumbling without reason. Radio signals glitching with strange pulses, like something beneath the surface was waking up. But no one listened. Not really. The world was already loud with its own problems. Wars still smoldering in the corners, economies teetering, climate unraveling. People argued over everything. Truth became optional. Leaders made promises with hollow eyes. No one was ready for something bigger. Until it came anyway. There's a story from a woman in southern Chile. She was a geologist working alone in the mountains, studying ancient rock layers no one cared about. One morning, her instruments picked up a frequency buried deep in the stone. It wasn't natural. Not seismic. It pulsed like a heartbeat. She followed it. It led her to a cave that hadn't been there the week before. Inside were walls smooth like glass, humming with heat. The deeper she went, the less earth it felt like. Until she found something she couldn't explain. Something buried in the rock. A pod. Not metal. Not bone. Just alive. She called for help. No one answered. 3 days later, she vanished. The cave sealed itself. And the mountain went silent again. But that was just one place. Similar stories happened in the Arctic, in the jungles of Borneo, deep below abandoned coal mines in Europe. Strange symbols found etched into stone that didn't belong. Craters that glowed blue at night. The invaders had been here before. Not as conquerors, but as architects. They had prepared this world long ago. Buried their machines. Planted seeds in the dirt. Left behind the bones of a future war waiting for the signal. Earth wasn't chosen by accident. It was part of a plan. One humanity was never supposed to survive. But something changed. They expected us to be divided. Easy to manipulate. Easy to crush. But by the time their ships appeared, people had started to notice the patterns. A quiet, unofficial alliance was forming beneath the surface. Not run by governments, but by those who still had something to protect. Old enemies spoke in code. Broken satellites were brought back online by teenagers working from basements. Medical labs in Antarctica were converted into data bunkers. Even in the ruins of what used to be New Delhi, children ran encrypted signals between rooftop antennas, carrying messages across the world. It wasn't enough to stop the invasion, but it slowed it down. And that was enough to build something, anything, to fight back. There's a man named Ilya. No one really knows where he's from. His accent changes. His story changes. But he's always in the right place at the right time. First spotted near the edges of what used to be Kiev, pulling survivors out of fallen tunnels. Then weeks later, coordinating airlifts for a resistance group in Central Asia. They say he used to be military. Others say he used to be nothing. Just a man who lost everything and decided that was enough. What makes him different isn't what he knows. It's what he remembers. He remembers the day the first alien craft fell. He remembers the smell of smoke and blood. He remembers what it felt like to hold a weapon and not know if it would do anything. He remembers fear. But he also remembers what came after. The moment when silence turned into screaming. The moment people stopped running and started fighting. That moment changed him. Now he carries a notebook with names. Names of those who helped. Names of those who stayed behind so others could live. Names of people who mattered. Because this war isn't about glory. It's about memory. About not letting the world forget who we are. And maybe that's the real reason Earth still has a chance. Because memory, our ability to remember pain, to remember love, to remember what's worth dying for, is something they don't understand. The aliens operate on precision. They calculate. They model. But memory isn't clean. It's messy. Human. It turns ruins into symbols. It turns loss into purpose. There's a bunker beneath what used to be northern Canada. They call it Echo Site. It's not official. Not recognized. But it's one of the last functioning nodes of the old global defense net. Inside are 100 people. Scientists, coders, medics, people who didn't flee when the bombs came. They stayed and rewired the bones of the old world into something new. Echo Site doesn't launch weapons. It launches truth. Recordings. Evidence. It sends signals across the sky, broadcasting stories of survival, of resistance, of victories, no matter how small. Because they believe the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a reason. A reason to fight. A reason to believe Earth isn't done. One of their transmissions reached a group of survivors hiding in the ruins of Istanbul. Just a few dozen people. No training. No gear. Just grit. They had given up. Ready to disappear quietly. But then the signal came through. A woman's voice reading out names of those still standing. Reading coordinates. Instructions. Oh. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it lit a fire in them. They began scavenging parts. Old solar panels. Damaged drones. Tools buried under concrete. And when the next alien patrol passed overhead, they triggered a homemade EMP so strong it knocked the enemy out of the sky. They didn't just fight back. They started building. They started planning. The invaders saw humans as fragile. Biologically weak. Emotionally unstable. But that's what made them dangerous. Because in a species like ours, even broken pieces can still cut. There's still mystery in the sky. The enemy motherships hover in low orbit, never speaking, never changing course. But sometimes they shimmer. Not like metal. Like water. Like something alive. People wonder what's inside them. No one knows. There are rumors, captured signals that don't match any pattern, strange dreams shared by people miles apart, flashes of memories that don't belong to anyone. The idea spreading now is darker. Maybe the invaders don't just want Earth. Maybe they want what we are. Maybe they're not just destroying cities. Maybe they're studying us. Watching. Learning. And if that's true, then every battle we win is a signal back to them. That we're more than what they thought. That we don't break the way they expected. There's an old woman in the mountains of Ethiopia who hasn't spoken since her village was destroyed. But every morning she draws shapes in the dirt, symbols no one can explain. Symbols that match the ones found inside the enemy ships. No one taught her them. She just knows. And now scientists are watching, scribbling notes, comparing them to signals intercepted in deep space. Because the more this war drags on, the more it feels like something ancient is waking up. Not just the enemy, something else. Something buried in us. A memory we don't understand yet. And maybe that's the final reason why we're still here. Because Earth is more than a battlefield. It's a mystery. A challenge. A place that refuses to fit inside their models. Every time they strike, we learn. Every time we fall, we rise stranger, sharper, more dangerous. There's a rhythm now. Not one of defeat, but defiance. And it echoes across the globe. In the forests of Brazil, people are using modified sound weapons based on alien tech to defend what's left of the rainforest. In the Australian outback, solar-powered railguns built by college students are punching holes in enemy drones. In a crumbling subway tunnel in Paris, artists have turned the walls into maps, tracking every skirmish, every flash of resistance, every sign that Earth is not done fighting. These stories matter. Because they remind the universe of something it keeps forgetting. We're not visitors here. We're not accidents. We're not just intelligent. We are stubborn. We are emotional. We are survivors. And the final war for Earth? It won't be decided by who has the biggest weapons. It'll be decided by who's willing to bleed for tomorrow. The enemy doesn't understand that yet. But they will. Because beneath the rubble and static, beneath the fear and exhaustion, humanity is changing. Becoming something new. Something forged in loss. And in the silence before the next storm, in the dark corners where the enemy hasn't yet looked, we are waiting. Not to hide, but to strike. The wind had changed. No one could explain it, not even the scientists, but people felt it. A heavy stillness in the air. Like the planet was holding its breath. In the mountains. On the broken highways. In the shattered cities where shadows moved without sound. Everyone could feel it. Something was coming. Something big. And it wasn't just another wave of drones or walkers. This was different. They had been quiet for too long. Watching. Waiting. Now they were moving again. All at once. Across every continent. From the frozen north to the southern deserts. The enemy stirred like one mind had flipped a switch. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a final sweep. A last push. People whispered words they hadn't said in weeks. Words like end, like last stand, like now or never. But no one was giving up. Not anymore. Because by now humanity had lost too much to surrender. There was nothing else left to give but everything. In the ruins of a city once called Chicago, thousands of people gathered underground. Some carried weapons. Most didn't. Some had never fired a gun, never fought in their lives. But they were here. Because this was one of the last holdouts, one of the last living zones where enemy machines hadn't broken through. And they all knew it was next. They could see the lights in the sky. Glowing, shifting, gathering. Enemy ships hovered like silent gods, blotting out the stars. Drones moved through the streets in tight formations, searching, scanning, preparing. Every corridor was wired with homemade charges. Every rooftop lined with scavenged weapons. Every hand shaking but ready. There was a girl there. Young. Maybe 12. She carried an old radio in a rusted metal case, patched with tape. She held it like it was sacred. It wasn't just a radio. It was tuned into a resistance frequency. And that frequency held the last connection to the outside world. To people still fighting. Still living. Still hoping. A voice crackled through, distant and faint. We've seen their final formation. This is it. They're not holding back anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one needed to say what came next. In a lab deep beneath what was left of Greenland, a group of engineers, half-starved, half-awake, worked in silence. They were trying to finish something no one had ever tested. A pulse weapon pulled from the fragments of an enemy core found weeks ago. It was unstable. Dangerous. But it could send a blast through the atmosphere strong enough to fry every alien system above the hemisphere. If it worked. If it didn't, they'd all vanish in the flash. Still no one stopped working. Because this was what it meant to be human now. To risk everything on a maybe. To fight with broken tools, with wounded hands, with memories of those already gone. And then came the signal. Every resistance hub. Every outpost. Every fighter left alive got the same message. The tom. A single word. Now. Across the Pacific, a flotilla of stolen cargo ships, strapped with homemade missiles, crept through black waters under a sky choked with enemy clouds. Their target wasn't a ship. It was something floating just off the coast. Something no one had dared go near since it landed. A spire. Towering. Silent. Not metal. Not stone. Alive. It hummed with a low, pulsing rhythm that made skin crawl. Every time someone approached, machines responded before they got close. Entire units had been lost. But now, they had a shot. Because the sky above was about to light up. In the northern sky, near what was left of Iceland, the pulse weapon fired. Not with a boom, but with a breath. A flash of white that moved like lightning trapped in a shell. It tore through the atmosphere. And for the first time the enemy blinked. Ships stuttered. Lights dimmed. Systems froze mid-air. Every defense line went offline. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Enough for the flotilla to strike. Enough for sleeper units on the ground to rise. Enough for hope to shift from dream to weapon. In the heart of what used to be Berlin, a tower built by the enemy flickered. Its smooth, seamless surface cracked for the first time. From the crack came light. Not soft. Not warm. But wild. Blinding. And from inside it, something screamed. Not sound. Not a voice. But pressure. People dropped to their knees. Ears bleeding. Eyes wide. Some began to cry. Not out of pain. But recognition. Whatever lived inside that tower wasn't just watching. It knew them. It had been studying. Listening. And now it spoke in a way only the body could feel. Terror. Pure, ancient terror. Every part of the world felt it. Even the sky seemed to bend. And yet, no one stopped. In tunnels, in craters, in broken streets, resistance fighters moved. They had no air cover. No backup. Just belief. That if they hit hard enough, fast enough, together, something would break. Somewhere, something would finally shatter. But the enemy was learning too. They were adapting. The pulse that gave humanity a chance only lasted seconds. And now their systems were waking back up. Drones flickered. Warwalkers rebooted. Towers began to seal themselves again. Time was running out. In the city of Lagos, a group of survivors rigged every skyscraper still standing with detonators. They weren't targeting the enemy. They were targeting the towers that the ships used to stabilize atmospheric control. They were going to bring down the entire skyline. One survivor whispered to the others, "If this fails, at least they'll remember where we stood." And then he pushed the switch. Half the sky lit up. Towers fell like dominoes. Alien ships reeled in confusion. The pulse had done its job. But Earth had to finish it. In orbit, the largest of the enemy ships began to move. No longer waiting. It descended. Massive. Silent. Final. Every screen left flickered. Every radio signal screamed static. And then came a new shape in the sky. Not a ship. A ring. It hovered just outside the atmosphere, growing larger by the minute. Some believed it was a weapon. Others said it was a gate. But one thing was clear. It was the endgame. This wasn't just the invasion anymore. This was the full reset. And humanity? Still scattered. Still wounded. Still desperate. Wasn't ready. Not really. But that didn't stop them. In New Zealand, a pilot with one functioning arm took a stolen enemy drone and loaded it with human tech. It was faster than anything Earth had ever built. He aimed it straight into the heart of the ship descending above Tokyo. He never returned. But the ship cracked. Its smooth hull tore open like paper. And from inside poured smoke. Not fire. Not oil. Smoke that twisted like it was alive. And in that smoke, shapes. Things no one had seen before. Not machines. Not soldiers. Something older. Something that remembered Earth. They didn't land. They fell. Like shadows dripping from the sky. Where they hit the ground, the Earth shook. Nothing human could get close. But one group did. A unit of survivors from the Andes. Their lungs used to the thin air. Their bodies small, fast, quiet. They moved in not to fight, but to observe. And what they saw changed everything. The things weren't just here to kill. They were searching. Digging. Looking for something inside Earth. And whatever it was, they were terrified of it. The survivors returned with footage. And now everyone had the same question. What were they trying to find? And more importantly, what would happen if we found it first? Somewhere in the last cave system untouched by the war, a signal began to rise. Faint. Repeating. Human frequencies couldn't decode it. But the old woman, the one who drew alien symbols in the dirt, stood up, looked toward the sky and whispered. It's waking up. What it was no one knew. But one thing was now certain. The final war wasn't just for Earth. It was for something hidden beneath its skin. Something the enemy feared. And something only humanity could reach. They had time. If they survived the night. And as the sky split open and the ring above began to pulse, every voice on Earth asked the same question. What comes next? And in the silence that followed, no one answered. The signal kept rising. First it was just static. A soft hum beneath the chaos. But as the ring above Earth began pulsing faster, the frequency below matched it, perfectly. One heartbeat above. One below. A sync that no one could explain and everyone feared. Deep beneath the planet's surface, in a forgotten mine beneath northern Mongolia, something old had started to breathe. Sensors scrambled. Instruments froze. And the people closest to it, miners turned survivors, stood in stunned silence as the rock around them pulsed with heat and rhythm. But it wasn't just in Mongolia. Reports poured in from Chile, from Siberia, from deep under the Atlantic. Places no longer mapped, where tunnels twisted like veins beneath the world. All of them pulsing. All of them humming. The same rhythm as the ring above. At first no one knew what it meant. Then came the footage from a scavenger drone outside of Algiers, raw, shaky, real. It showed an alien unit not destroying, not searching, but kneeling. Machines that had ripped through cities and torn down empires were on their knees, motionless. Like something had commanded them to stop. But it hadn't come from the sky. It came from below. And that's when everything changed. It wasn't Earth they wanted. It was what Earth had buried. Before there were cities. Before there were languages. Before there were even names. And maybe, before humans themselves. The alien fleet hadn't come to conquer. They had come to contain. That's what the scientists at EchoSight finally realized. Late into the night, surrounded by cracked monitors and half-functioning AI systems, they put it all together. The spires. The underground structures. The signals. The invaders weren't here to steal resources. They were here to keep something from getting out. They weren't the first to come. Just the first to fail. The enemy was afraid. And if beings that could tear through the solar system were afraid, then humanity had no idea what they were standing on. Still no one backed down. In fact, it made people fight harder. Because fear meant weakness. And weakness meant there was a way to win. Even if no one knew how yet. But then came the second twist. The ring above Earth, massive, pulsing, ominous. It wasn't just watching. It wasn't just waiting. It was broadcasting. Not outward. Not to other fleets. But down. Straight into Earth's crust. It was waking something up. Not an army. Not a machine. Something else. People started dreaming. All at once. Around the world. Dreams they couldn't shake. The same images. A burning sky. A hole in the earth so deep it swallowed stars. And a voice, low and cold and old, that spoke in no language but still made sense. Not with words. With feelings. Rage. Hunger. Loneliness. And the deepest one, remembrance. It remembered Earth. Because it had been here once. And it had been trapped. Not by humans. Not by machines. But by those who came before. A civilization gone so long no one remembered its name. But something they created, something buried deep, had survived. Now it wanted out. The ring above was the key. The invaders weren't opening it. They were holding it shut. And humanity, in all its fury and resistance, had just broken the lock. A second signal burst from the core of the Earth. Not one of light. One of gravity. It rippled through the mantle, up through the crust and into the sky. And the ring responded. It split. Not open. Apart. Like something inside had clawed its way out of control. Across the world, people fell to their knees, clutching their heads as the sound, the pressure, the presence, rushed into their minds. Some passed out. Some screamed. But a few understood. There was a boy in northern India, deaf since birth. He stood up and pointed to the sky and began drawing symbols in the dirt with shaking fingers. Symbols no one had taught him. Symbols seen only in the oldest ruins left untouched by war. The symbols meant one thing. Asterisk, it is not a god. It is not a demon. It is a mistake. Asterisk. The scientists at EchoSight scrambled. If this thing beneath the earth was never supposed to be awoken, then the invaders, cruel as they were, had been trying to protect the galaxy from something worse. But it was too late. Across the globe, the skies split again. The ring collapsed into light. The alien ships scattered, no longer hunting, no longer advancing, asterisk retreating star. They were afraid. Not of us. Of it. And suddenly, for the first time, humanity wasn't the target. It was the bystander. The world didn't celebrate. They stood in silence. What could make a species capable of planetary annihilation run? The answer rose with the smoke. It wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. But the ground trembled. Tectonic plates shifted like bones creaking in an ancient corpse. And in the darkness beneath the Pacific, something opened its eyes. It had no name. No face. No clear form. Just mass. consciousness, and memory of being chained. It didn't recognize humans as enemies. It didn't recognize humans at all. We were insects to it. Noise. Accident. And Earth was its prison, built by hands long turned to dust. The invaders had come not to destroy us, but to keep the seal from breaking. Now the seal was broken, and the thing inside was awake. In the final broadcast before all the satellites went dark, one scientist said it clearly, her voice calm despite the chaos behind her. We weren't the defenders of Earth. We were the trigger. The footage cut off. And now the world waits. Not for the aliens. Not for the war to end. But for something older than fear to decide what it wants. And what it remembers. No one knows if it can be stopped. No one knows if it even notices us. But in the silence that follows, across every ruined city and smoking mountain and shattered ocean, people are preparing for what may come next. Not peace. Not victory. But the real war. The one Earth was built to hide. And humanity now stands between the stars and something far worse. The sky is no longer the danger. The danger is beneath our feet. And the question now, more than ever, is not whether we survive. It's whether we ever understood what survival really meant. The enemy is gone. The war has only just begun. And the thing inside the Earth is listening. The world was no longer silent. It groaned. From the ocean depths to the highest mountains, the Earth let out a sound like a wound tearing open. Deep, layered, endless. Cities shook. Rivers changed direction. Skies swirled with colors no one had ever seen. Everything felt wrong. This wasn't just the planet reacting. It was responding. And whatever had been trapped beneath the surface was fully awake now. Across every outpost still functioning, every signal still able to be broadcast, one message kept looping. It's rising. No one knew what to do anymore. The alien ships had fled. The skies were almost clear, except for the faint shimmer left behind from the broken ring, now a dying arc slowly burning in the atmosphere like a second sun. And the Earth, our Earth, was breaking from the inside. It began in the Pacific. A split. A long, glowing crack that ran like a scar from the seabed all the way to the surface, opening slowly like a mouth. From inside poured not flame, not ash, but a darkness so thick it swallowed light. A shape began to form inside it. It was huge. Bigger than anything human minds could measure. Not just large in size, it carried a presence. A pull like gravity but colder. People collapsed miles away from the pressure of it waking. Whatever this thing was, it had no face. It had no clear body. It shifted constantly, solid and liquid and light all at once, like it was made from pieces of nightmares buried too deep to remember. It looked at nothing. Yet it saw everything. And then it spoke. Not in sound. Not in words. It entered thoughts. People screamed without knowing why. Others fell silent and didn't speak again. But a few, just a few, stood their ground. The resistance, what was left of it, didn't run. They had faced too much to stop now. They didn't understand what they were up against, but that never mattered to humans. Understanding wasn't survival. Action was. The survivors gathered everything, every piece of alien tech, every scrap of data, every broken machine. The engineers at Echo Site, working without sleep, managed to link one final device. It was risky. Maybe suicidal. But it was the only shot left. The plan wasn't to destroy it. That was impossible. The plan was to trap it again. To use what the aliens had built. They didn't come here to kill it. They came here to contain it. And Earth, the whole planet, had been the container. Now it was broken. So they had to build a new one. Fast. A signal was sent out. One final call. All resistance units. All satellites still floating. All power sources. Feed everything into the pulse grid. Create an energy web strong enough to restart the seal. One pulse. One synchronized shot. But it had to be launched from the center, ground zero, where the entity was rising. Someone had to go. It was a choice made in silence. Not because it was ordered, but because someone had to. It was Ilya. No rank. No badge. Just a man who had seen too much. He didn't say goodbye. He just took the pack, climbed into the last transport drone, and flew straight into the dark. The air around the entity warped. Gravity pulled sideways. Time felt like it bent. As he descended into the black, memories not his own filled his head. He saw stars collapsing. Civilizations vanishing. Not by war. By presence. This thing didn't destroy because it wanted to. It destroyed because it was. Its existence unraveled matter. Its thoughts tore through memory. And it had been trapped inside Earth, by choice. Because the ones who came before had found a way to make it forget itself. They used Earth, its nature, its chaos, its life, to hold the thing still. But now, with humanity waking it up, it was starting to remember. Ilya reached the center. The air was glass. The ground molten. The shape of the thing loomed above, stretching higher than clouds. He activated the pulse device. Every part of Earth responded. Circuits hidden in deserts. Relays beneath oceans. Satellite debris in orbit. It all flared alive. And then came the pulse. A light that cracked the sky. A scream that never touched air. It wasn't power. It was memory. The energy wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to remind. To force the thing to remember why it let itself be sealed. Why it stopped moving. Why it feared itself. The pulse didn't fight the entity. It reflected it. Showed it what it had done. Showed it the lives it had ended. Showed it Earth, refusing to go quietly. And something changed. The thing paused. The pressure lifted for a moment. Long enough for the signal to lock. Long enough for the grid to finish closing. The energy ring wrapped around the planet. Not tight. Not hard. But firm. A boundary. One not made from metal but will. And the entity, for the first time in its existence, chose not to fight. Remembered why it stopped the first time. It sank back. Slowly. Quietly. Back into the earth. And the crack sealed. The light faded. And the silence returned. But not the same silence. This time it was full of breath. Full of waiting. Earth survived. The invaders were gone. The danger passed. But just as people began to rise, one final message came through. Not from the entity. Not from Ilya. From a satellite, long dormant, just reactivated by the pulse. It wasn't broadcasting in human language. It was broadcasting in the same rhythm the entity used. Translating it into something we could understand. One phrase. Just one. I'm not the only one. The screen went black. And far beyond the edge of the solar system, 1,000 rings began to glow. The world didn't go back to normal. There was no normal to return to. But Earth was still here. And that meant something. The ground had stopped trembling. The skies had cleared. The oceans, though altered, had calmed. The massive cracks along the Pacific plates had sealed with strange, smooth rock, as if the planet had stitched itself shut. People slowly emerged from bunkers, caves, tunnels, shattered homes. Blinking in the sunlight like they'd never seen it before. Because for a while, they hadn't. And even with the wounds still fresh, even with the silence stretching across ruined cities and empty valleys, people felt it. This wasn't the end of everything. It was the beginning of something else. News spread in pieces. No network had been fully restored yet, but word traveled. Through signals, runners, rebuilt transmitters. Through the sky, through whispers, through hope. Earth had survived. And humanity, beaten and burned and bloodied, had done what no one expected. Not just the aliens. Not even themselves. They had saved something no one else dared touch. They'd stepped between the stars and something older than time, and they didn't run. No one ever heard from Ilya again. The drone had melted mid-flight, the energy pulse had fried every trace. Some said he died in the blast. Some said he merged with the seal, became part of it. Some said he was still alive, in the deepest parts of the earth, watching over the thing he helped silence. But no one really needed the answer. Because what mattered was that someone chose to go. And that choice changed everything. The resistance slowly dissolved, not from defeat but because it was no longer needed in the same way. People still worked together, still helped one another, but now it wasn't to fight. It was to rebuild. The scientists at EchoSite were pulled from their caves and set up in what was left of Norway, building the first global memory archive. A record not just of what was lost, but of how humanity had stood up when everything fell. Children who had grown up in the war began to speak again. Artists, quiet for years, began to paint the skies the way they remembered them. Old soldiers laid down their weapons not because they were done, but because they wanted their children to hold tools instead of guns. And yet, not everything was peace. The last transmission from the satellite still lingered in every mind. I'm not the only one. It didn't matter if people tried to forget it. They couldn't. Somewhere out there, others existed. Other rings. Other entities. Things humanity wasn't supposed to awaken. Things buried in other worlds. Or maybe traveling between them. No one knew. But this time, no one would be caught unaware. A new organization formed, not made of governments but of survivors, thinkers, engineers, and veterans. They didn't call themselves rulers. They didn't claim power. They called themselves watchers. Not to control. To remember. To keep their eyes open where others might blink. They didn't prepare for war. They prepared for understanding. To learn why Earth had been chosen. Why that entity had once sealed itself here. Why life had been allowed to grow on top of it. And what role humans might have in something far bigger than they'd ever imagined. One theory rose quickly. It didn't come from the scientists or the strategists. It came from an old teacher who survived the collapse of Buenos Aires. She wrote in her journal that maybe Earth wasn't just a prison for something dangerous. Maybe it was also a cradle. A balance. A place built to hold something terrifying, but also capable of raising something capable. That maybe the entity hadn't destroyed us when it could have. Because it saw something in us. Something it didn't expect. Emotion. Memory. Choice. Humanity. And maybe, just maybe, it had once been like us. Before it became what it became. Before it forgot. That idea took root. It changed the way people looked at the past. At the stars. At each other. The cities weren't rebuilt the same way. No more towers scraping the clouds for no reason. No more walls between people. No more pretending the planet could be stretched endlessly for profit or pride. People remembered now. What it felt like to lose everything. And what it felt like to still stand up. Rebuilding was hard. It hurt. But it was worth it. In the middle of what used to be Alaska, a dome was built. Not a base. A place of quiet. A place where people could come to remember the war, not with hate but with reverence. The names of every lost city, every fallen fighter, every scientist, medic and child who didn't make it, were etched into stone, winding around the structure like DNA. And above it was a single sentence. We did not break. One day a boy visited that dome. He was maybe 8. His parents had survived the final years of the war. He had no memory of it himself. But he had grown up in the silence it left behind. He walked the spiral slowly, reading the names out loud to himself. And when he got to the center, he looked up at the stars and whispered a question. Will they come back? No one answered. But someone nearby, a woman with lines on her face and old wounds on her hands, heard him. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just said, maybe. But we'll be ready. The stars remained quiet. But Earth pulsed gently. Not with fear. With life. With millions of people who knew, finally, what it meant to fight for something. And if another ring lit up out there, if another ancient thing started to stir, it would not find the same Earth it once ignored. It would find us. Humanity. Flawed. Loud. Stubborn. But alive. And ready. Because we weren't just survivors anymore. We were keepers. Keepers of a world that had nearly ended. Keepers of memory. Of loss. Of each other. We hadn't just saved Earth. We had earned it. The final war wasn't about winning. It was about enduring. And we did. That's the story. The story of how humanity was tested by the stars, by its own past, by forces beyond comprehension, and chose not to bow. Because we are many things. But most of all, we are human. And that was always enough. The end. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Truly. Share this video. With your friends, with fellow sci-fi fans, with anyone who believes humanity's strength is more than just muscle and machines. It's our heart, our memory, our will. Like the video if you felt the weight of the story. Let's keep this story alive. Let's show the world what HFY really means. Because the war may be over, but the stories, they're just beginning. Thanks for watching.